At Rubberband, we empower each other through positivity, kindness, and practical advice. Join a community of thousands of peers who understand the unique challenges you face. Rubberband. Company agnostic, low ego, high empathy, always supportive. And we are live. Welcome, listeners, to today's episode of the Rubberband podcast, where I am joined by special guest John Van Noorden from Rosewood Partners for a Recruitment Chinwag. Now, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I live and work on, the Wadawurrung and Dja Dja Wurrung people. I recognise their continuing connection to the land and waterways. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and I would like to extend this to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Welcome, John from Rosewood Partners. Hello, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having us on here. It's exciting to be podcasting again. I think I mentioned to you I ran a podcast for a number of years, so it's great to have the microphone back out and a reason to use it.
And what a microphone, mate. I feel really amateur with my little plug-in. Yours is like, I expect you to put the cans on. And
I've got them in the cupboard. I decided it was too hot. They're more for winter. But yeah, no, it's fun having this type of technology. Like, I'm engineer by background, so any excuse to buy an additional piece of technology, I'll make it.
I know. I need to set up a studio of some sort. You know, you're looking at me in my little spare bedroom with a plug-in into my Mac, and, you know, that's as sophisticated as it comes. But, you know, one day...
I mean, when I ran the podcast for I think it was about 5 or 6 years, I always had people asking, you know, how do I start a podcast? And I was like, buy a microphone and start recording, because you won't know if you enjoy it until you start. You don't need to get a great setup. You don't need to have a whole lot written down for exactly what you want it to be, but you need to be able to, you know, you just need to be able to record. And yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. And I get a lot of feedback from listeners as well that they actually quite like that. It just seems like I'm having a coffee with a mate from the industry, and we're chatting about what's going on and hearing about their career, and there's no kind of bells and whistles or highbrow content. It's, you know, it's just down to earth and fun, and I do it as a hobby, right? So I agree, John. Like, anyone out there that wants to do it, start recording. You can record on your phone and get a Magic Masterer, and it's all done, right?
yeah, exactly.
Right. Here we are, geeking out about podcasts. But let's I'm really excited to catch up with you today, John, because I really love your career journey, and you know, Recruitment Chinwags are all about that. I love that you've worked in agency and internal, and you've been quite fluid in terms of going between the two. That really excites me, and I think it's really valuable content for our community. But the best place for us to start, John, I want to go back to your childhood. I want to hear about your history. I want to hear about growing up. So tell me about young John.
Young John was very tall. So I was my current height, which is about 190 centimeters when I was 13 years old.
Wow.
So I just fully grown. So young John played a lot of sport, and mostly just because of how tall I was, I played a lot of sport. But that was me growing up. Always, you know, a ball in a hand or something like that, and an excuse to go play a sport and get out of school. But I still am that way in a lot of ways. I've got a couple of balls just next to me, so that when I'm on a recruitment call, if I'm, you know, thinking, I can just toss a ball around. It sort of helps me think now as well, which is great.
Oh, I've got no hand-eye coordination, so I'm jealous of you ball sport types. I'm dreadful. I could never kick a ball. Like, I was shocking. So I was an arty teenager. I love, you know, the sport thing. Tennis was okay. Tennis was cool, but no. I can't throw a ball around. I can barely.
You'd probably have me covered for all racquetball sports. I definitely need to have it in my hand in order to be effective.
No, bring on the cycling. Cycling's the best for people like me. You know, you get in the zone. It's that deep kind of concentration, and you just keep going and going. I love it.
Your perseverance. That's all that hard work. That's good.
Yeah, it's all about finding that physical activity that suits you, and I think there's something that suits everyone. But
Yeah.
High school, sporty. Where did you grow up? What were you in Melbourne?
I was in Melbourne. I was in the outer northeastern suburbs, out in Eltham. Went to Eltham High, and I was a pretty I ended up being an engineer and going to uni, but I was a pretty typical engineer as well in school, and that I did pretty much straight math sciences all the way through, and my English art stuff, which I would be jealous of your skills at now, I was maybe lacking in that sort of creative, those creative fields. But very, very math sciencey. Eltham, big blocks out in the northeast, and had a great time growing up out there. My dad was, I was pretty lucky in terms of growing up. My dad was a managing director, so ran a publishing house, and that meant that he worked a lot, but it meant that we had it pretty easy growing up, given the fact that Eltham was a lower socioeconomic area at the time. But I probably was pretty oblivious to the fact that I had it a lot easier than those around me.
And I'm the same. I grew up lower socioeconomic area as well, but I had a great childhood, really. Like, we never wanted for anything, and I think it's not until you're an adult that you kind of reflect on that and think, oh wow, I did have it a little bit better than some of my friends. You just don't realize it at the time.
I know, and I think back now and I go, man, I would have handled so many of those things differently had I just had a bit more perspective. But I think that I was probably, being the math sciencey type, I was maybe a little bit thick on the people side of things. Even though I was always outgoing and trying to make lots of friends, I probably, missed that, being empathetic to other people's situations until I was in my 20s. But that's, live and learn, try to be better going forward.
I love that you studied engineering and that you're an engineer. We have at Movember in our HR team, we have an engineer as well that moved into HR. Okay. So I find you people fascinating because, like you said, like it's mathematical, and it's I suppose, like, it's analytical, it's numbers, it's all of that. It's not necessarily the people side of your brain that you're using, yet you've moved into HR. So I'm really fascinated to hear how that all came about. But firstly, very first job. What was your very first job?
Cook at KFC.
Nice.
I think I heard, similar to you, 14 and 9 months. As soon as I could work, I was working.
Me too.
And my older sister was front of house at KFC, so we formed a great 1-2 punch at the local KFC. But it's sort of interesting. I reflect on it now, and you do learn a lot in your first job about, what a work environment looks like, no matter what type of work environment you're in, and some of the habits and behaviors you learn. And I do probably think that maybe looking back, KFC could have done a few things better to better prepare people and have a more professional workplace. But I had a lot of fun, and it was a good first job.
You're scaring me. People don't spit into the zinger burgers, do they?
No.
No, good.
nothing like that. The worst one was that I went into the freezer one time to get some, like, there was everything came in fresh every single day, but in case there was emergencies, there was emergency stock in a freezer, and I went into one of the freezers and somebody locked me in there for maybe 40 minutes. And it's just like, like it was freezing cold, because those industrial freezers are crazy. But it was just like, this is just a bad use of everyone's time. No point having somebody locked in a freezer for 40 minutes, but just little things like that. I mean, they're all harmless when you look back at them, but
totally.
Could be more effective.
I know you could have defrosted by jumping in the deep fryer. That would have made it worse. Yeah. But oh, there we go. Well, talk me through your career. So you studied engineering at university. Then what happened in terms of your professional career? What was your first kind of, let's call it serious gig?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a little bit of flow at the start, which happened with my degree. So I'll just touch on that. When I went to uni, I went to study environmental engineering. I thought that's a good mix of the environment, which I cared about, and engineering, which is probably where my brain naturally works. And maybe my first year into my degree, every single one of my friends was in chemical engineering, different degree. So I pivoted very quickly. And chemical engineering, very different to environmental engineering. You're typically working with heavy plastics and oil and gas. So the industries are typically more heavy. There are some food and other sort of aligned industries, but a lot more heavy industries in Australia. And that was where my first job ended up being, was in like a heavy industry servicing company. So a big engineering company that worked doing design and maintenance for all of Bass Strait's oil and gas facilities. So not the most exciting thing for somebody that was a little bit more, environmental leaning. But I think at that age, I was just excited to get my first job, start getting some money coming in for the first time ever, or real money, the way that I was sort of thinking about it at the time. And yeah, it was a good learning experience. I think that, I met my wife. Also, she's an engineer. We both met in our first working company, which was really exciting. But I think similarly, we both arrived, looked around at all of the people who were in our minds, the real engineers, and thought, this isn't going to be for me forever. I'm interested in it, but not in the same way that that these people are. So if as soon as you start, you're actually trying to think about what is my career going to be, because I can tell this isn't going to be forever.
And you clearly, we're talking about what you're doing now, right? Working in recruitment and talent acquisition. But when was the moment where you pivoted from engineering, and what was that pivot? How did that all come about, and where did you go?
Yeah, so there was a couple of different things that I was doing to sort of fulfill those other parts that I was interested in. So I was like the head of the corporate social responsibility for Australia and a couple of the other aligned regions, and that sort of helped me with a couple more social causes and places where I could work with others rather than engineering. While you work as part of a big team, you kind of working individually as part of that team rather than working together, which is the people part that I liked the most. An opportunity came up to move into the projects team and the business development team. So actually work on winning new work. And that was a lot more aligned to the things that I was interested in. The project management stuff, less so. I got to work with more people, but at my level of experience, it was very much just going and asking a lot of other senior people whether they'd done what they said that they were going to do. And that didn't seem that exciting. My wife at the time moved to work for Inventium, which at the time was like the preeminent innovation consultancy, and that sort of expanded my network into a whole lot of the innovation and creativity thought leadership space. So then I ended up leaving and working with a thought leader, Dr. Jason Fox, and on sort of expanding his brand in a traditional business development role. And that was probably my first real pivot out of engineering. I think a lot of people make that pivot as well when they're not sure, is maybe business development, relationships. You know that you want to be around people. You don't really know what you want to do other than that, though.
Yeah, I think that's across all sectors, right? Where you decide that maybe what I've studied or what I've been doing isn't quite right, and you move into business development. I mean, I even did the same when, I left floristry. It was like, okay, I'll go into corporate business development and work out what to do next, right? It's a good, because so many of your transferable skills, even going right back to KFC, right, you bring to light in those kind of roles as well. So when did recruitment come about? The big question. How did that happen?
So that felt pretty organic over a number of years. So around the same time that I moved out and started working in business development, moved out of engineering, I had a real passion for sport still. I was still very, very interested in sport. I'd done a lot of coaching in my life, and I was particularly interested in how to build great teams. So I started doing some free analysis of AFL lists and sending it to list managers around the country, thinking, maybe this is going to be the career for me. I love sport. I love this analysis stuff. And I was lucky enough that one of the clubs in particular got back to me in the early days and helped me to get on board and be involved in some list discussions and in some player recruitment. So going out and scouting the under 18s in the freezing cold winter on a Saturday and Sunday morning. So that was nice of them to let me volunteer to do that. But it did sort of give me a big lean into this team building recruitment space, albeit in a completely different industry. And that's also when I started my podcast, which was on list building and how to build a successful sports team. And I did that for probably 3-4 years. So that was, I think I left engineering at the end of 2016 and ran that until maybe 2019. So there was probably, I kept running it after I started in recruitment formally. But there was a 6-month period before I started in recruitment where I said, I'm either going to get a job in sports and finish this, or I'm going to do something else. And I was sitting down with my wife and we were sort of just talking and it sort of all clicked. It's like, you can actually do recruitment in business. I just hadn't reached that point yet. Like, as I hadn't reached the point where there's a talent acquisition team, they're all doing hiring. This has got to be it. So for me, it felt like this natural progression that I've been working towards, albeit I had never experienced it in a business other than going through a job interview process myself. And then I just went and applied to every single recruitment consultancy job that I could find, thinking, hopefully someone takes a chance on me and I can start learning.
And I bet you had about 1 million callbacks, right? I mean, right? Like, because it just, for me, it's probably, and I'm getting close to 200 episodes of this podcast, right? Like, the way you just described moving from sport recruitment into business recruitment is probably one of the most logical pathways that I've heard. Usually people will say, well, I fell into it, I didn't know much about it. But for me, it just makes sense. I mean, what were your expectations of recruitment within business? What did you think you were going to move into when you joined an agency?
Yeah, so I really had no clear clue at the start. Like, I knew that it would be about helping people hire and build teams, but I didn't know anything more than that. And what I thought I would do is, and I think I was actually really lucky in this way, is go join a big global company. So I joined Robert Half and see how a big global business does this. Like, what processes do they use? What KPIs do they use? How do they actually go about doing this thing? And I am going to follow everything to the absolute letter. So if you set KPIs, I'll hit every single one of them, and I'll just, I guess, see how people do recruitment. So I didn't have real expectations about what this role was going to be about. I guess one of the things that I was very passionate about from the start, though, was building teams, which I think helped. It helped the purpose bit really quickly, because I was never stuck thinking I have to business develop and win jobs. And I was never even thinking about that. I was always thinking, how can I help other people build teams? So I was even though I was pretty selfish, I wanted to grow and develop, and I didn't necessarily have the skills yet. My want was pretty aligned with other businesses' wants, which was build great teams. So I found it relatively easy to get going, given that my intentions were pure.
Yeah, but you're using that engineering brain, right? Like, you're talking about learning the science of recruitment in a global firm and, doing everything the way you were shown and taught and continuing to learn along the way and taking a more mathematical approach to it rather than just picking up the phone and seeing how you go, right? Like, I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and look, that's probably very much so down to the process brain. Is that you go, okay, then this is exactly how I'm going to approach this, and I'm going to see how I can make the best fist of this I can. And I guess another thing that played into, I guess, how my career played out at the very start of recruitment was that 3-4 months into starting, the pandemic hit. So I'd only really just been taught how to do recruitment before everything sort of got thrown. And that the learning period for me was a blessing in disguise. Obviously, if we could choose to not have the pandemic, definitely would choose to not have it and everything that went with it. But the learning experience for me was like absolutely invaluable, because effectively what it felt like is it leveled the playing field. No one had experience in that environment. So no one had ever had experience doing recruitment fully remotely and having to hire people into fully remote roles, like a really deep, like maybe broad experience in that space. So I just felt like, as I said, it leveled the playing field. I was like, okay, then great. Now the experience of, knocking down doors and doing the rounds matters less. It actually matters more is understanding this circumstance and trying to help people as much as possible in this circumstance. So yeah, it ended up working out pretty well for me, which was great.
And you transitioned to internal recruitment from Robert Half. Tell me about, how did that come about, and what was the, I suppose, motivation to move to the other side?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I don't think that there is a side that is, better. I think that I always wanted to do both. And I know that there are some people who are agency, you go, internal TA don't know anything, and internal TA that go, all agencies are just annoying and they're just trying to get money out of us. It's a pretty bad stigma for like a group of people that actually work really well together when you work in a partnership. The business itself, Planet Innovation, which is where I ended up going, I knew them from maybe 3 or 4 years back. Before I even started in recruitment, I met some of their like different founders that they were growing pretty quickly. They were an engineering company, so I was pretty interested in their background. They'd won Most Innovative Company in Australia like 3 years in a row. It was an exciting business to be in. And on top of working a little bit with them when I was at Robert Half, so I got a couple of roles on and did a bit of work with them and started to meet the team. I also, with one of those founders who I knew, made a recommendation of somebody that might be a good fit for their chairman. I knew that they were looking for a chairman, and I just so happened to know somebody who would fit that business well, and it just so happened that he ended up there. So it not that was the thing that caused it, but I think that made the chief people officer go, okay, then I should at least speak to this guy and see whether he's interesting. Initially, when I went and had the meeting with her, I thought that she was engaging Robert Half to help me hire them an internal TA person. So I was taking a job brief and everything, but it was an interview. I realized later. But yeah, I loved that experience going internal and just sort of seeing the other side of things.
Yeah, totally. And I agree with you. I mean, we say the other side, but for the much of a muchness, right, where we all do the same thing. And I think this is where, there can be a little bit of breakdown in communications, whereas, some internal professionals feel that agencies are really focused solely on BD and selling. And I think some agencies think that internal teams are solely focused on the administrative side of recruitment. But it's certainly not that way. I think people like yourself and myself that have worked in both throughout our career, you're fundamentally doing exactly the same thing. You just have different stakeholders, right? Like, I believe.
I think the exact same thing. And I think in both, like as in when you're an agency, say it's a 50-50 time split between recruitment and business development. It's the same internal. It's a 50-50 split between recruitment and internal meetings, administration and everything else. But you're still spending just as much time recruiting. You're trying to build businesses. You're trying to be successful. You're trying to place people who are going to be successful long-term. You're not trying to just, get a quick win. I think fundamentally there is alignment. I just think that there's a little bit of distrust from both sides in general.
Yeah, which is silly. I don't get that at all. I'm a big believer in partnership and the value that, internals bring to agencies, agencies bring to internals. We should be learning from each other. That's why I love the Rubberband community. But what have been some of the biggest lessons you've learned over the years, John?
If you spend way too much time online, first of all, same. And second, you need promo guy talk pills. I'm Rawal, and with Alex, we break down everything happening in tech, digital marketing, and the internet's latest chaos. No boring corporate talk, just real discussions with real opinions. So go on, press play. You know you want to.
Yeah, so I think that I learned most of my besides just natural learning, like you start a new job and you have to learn things very, very quickly. The big thing for me, seeing both sides, going internal and then having to work with alongside everyone that I'd hired, which is very different to when you're working in agency, was just how important business fit, team fit, culture fit, whatever you want to call it, is to somebody being successful. And I know that we all talk about culture fit, but it makes a massive difference being able to land somebody whose passions and goals and inspiration and work style fits with the way that the business is doing things or stretches the business to be better. I think that before then, there were a couple of placements that I made in agency where I knew that people were a technical fit and they were good people. Maybe that their goals, though, weren't actually aligned with that of the businesses. And, a year later, they left or the business moved in a different direction. And, on paper, that's a success for an agency. They get through the guarantee period and the business had someone for 12 months. I guess that's enough. But, I had the biggest feelings of success when I would see people getting promoted. I hired them. I worked alongside them for 2 years. They started hiring for their team. Then they got promoted into a bigger, better role. That was the thing that made me the most happy and the most excited. So really focusing on how you can get that alignment between someone's goals and passions and culture and the business's goals and passion and culture, it makes a massive difference.
Yeah, but I'll add to that because I think from my perspective, it's a values alignment. So I've got a funny relationship with culture, and I'm a little bit unique in this thinking, right? So a lot of people won't agree with me, but I always think that culture is it's living and breathing, and it continues to evolve and continues to change. And often there are organisations that I wouldn't necessarily fit into, but maybe if I was to work there, the culture would change and become a little bit different. And it's almost like this being in itself, right? But I think fundamentally, when it comes to seeing people thrive in an organisation, they need to be connected to that purpose. They need to be aligned to the values of that organisation. And then in terms of what you're trying to match rather than fit is, okay, how am I going to see this person thrive? What's that career going to look like? Yeah. Maybe they're looking for a long-term career where they're climbing a ladder, and that's totally cool. Or maybe they just want to come in and do a gig for a couple of years and have something cool on their CV. That's also okay. It's finding that there are so many different elements to it that I think are above what a culture's, what an organisation's culture looks like from the outside.
I totally couldn't agree more. Like when I was working at PI, Planet Innovation, and I was building the ATS with all of the interview guides and everything in the back end, I deliberately wrote culture add rather than culture fit. It's how can people come in? They're either going to add to it because they don't fit the way that the current business is, but they're going to add to it in a way that's exciting for us. It's not just thinking about people that fit exactly what we look like now. And you're right, it's just a messy word, culture fit, because it gets misinterpreted so much. But some of the best working relationships that I've had with people were actually values aligned, fundamentally, incredibly different people. So hit loggerheads on lots of things, but both know that each other is trying to achieve the right thing for the organization, and we come from like a respect, have mutual respect for working in a good way with one another. And that's all you actually need to get the right results for the company and to have a good working relationship. It's when there's that, as you said, that values gap between people that it makes it pretty hard to overcome.
Yeah. And when there is a values gap, that's when I think it is appropriate to think of it as not a culture fit. Right? Yeah. Does that make sense? I think
100%.
I think that's the missing piece in the middle of it all. It's a fascinating conversation that we could continue to have for ages. But I want to hear about how Rosewood Partners came about. Tell me about that moment in your career.
Yeah, so that was pretty exciting, really. Like I think for a long period of time, I've been somewhat entrepreneurial, like as in I'd started businesses in the past. They're not on my LinkedIn profile because they didn't last very long. They just came up. They were a product business and they didn't work. Or I started a podcast, or I always had ideas to start businesses and they never quite got off the ground. But this one seemed achievable. I actually tried when I was at Planet Innovation to start an internal recruitment agency. I thought, I don't necessarily have to leave to do this. We were a consultancy ourselves, at Planet Innovation. I could be an internal consultancy to all of our clients. I know this industry incredibly well. I can support them, and we can do a good fee for market model. It's an additional value add. It was not aligned with the goals of the business, so it didn't get up. But that sort of sowed the seeds for wanting to do this. I was always looking for a business partner as well that would be really excited to do something like this. And the one recruiter who I was still using when I was at Planet Innovation was Julian, who's the person that's ended up being my business partner. And he'd moved, was living in Brisbane, but still working in the Melbourne office of Robert Half. And we sort of talked at length about, he was thinking maybe he would do that one day. And then it just lined up that I was going, okay, then, well, I'm gonna do this. And if you want to join me, let's just do it. And I think that I sort of caught up with him one day online, had like a full business plan for exactly how I was going to set everything up. And it's changed drastically since that time. But that was really the birth of it. So it's been going for a little over 2 years now. And I think like anything that's 2 years old, I think that like any business that's 2 years old, it was about midway through last year that I realized that I was, a year and a half into a 10-year journey rather than being like 2 years into something. Which when you're in a job and you've been in a job for 2 years, it feels like, progression. You're at the peak of your powers. You're ready for something more. And I just sort of realized, no, there's heaps more to get out of this, but I have to start seeing this as a 10-year journey rather than as a 2 to 3.
And I love it. It's a success story, right? And, listeners, Julian Rowe is John's partner. Feel free to look his LinkedIn profile up as well. But what I really love about that story, John, is that you talk about, dipping your toes in businesses that haven't quite worked. I've had 3 businesses that haven't worked as well. And now you've found that sweet spot, right? And that's all, that's kind of the opposite of your engineering brain, right? You're open to the creativity and open to giving things a try and taking a plunge, see what happens, and picking yourself up again. And I think that's really special. And I love the partnership that yourself and Julian have. And being able to have that courage to get out there again, and then this time seeing it blossom and seeing it thrive. It's really fabulous.
I think one of the, this is probably the biggest learning that I've had from starting a business as well, is that when I worked at Robert Half, I sat opposite Julian. So we were sitting opposite a divider in the same but slightly different teams. And I would say that we were friendly with one another. We were good colleagues, but we weren't really friends. We weren't close buddies or anything like that. But there was a values alignment and there was mutual respect, which are those two things that we sort of talked about before with what actual culture alignment means. So it means that even though we weren't the best of friends, getting into starting a business together, starting on the right foot, which is values are aligned. Fundamentally, our values are aligned. So when we challenge one another, which happens often, we challenge one another, it comes from a good place because we both know that we're trying to drive the right outcome. We both fully respect and trust the other person. And it's very different to some of the other businesses where I've started before, where I've started with a buddy. And we get frustrated with one another and we think the other one is wrong. That doesn't really happen here. I think we get frustrated with one another, but neither one of us thinks we're wrong. We're just like, okay, then we'll work through this. We'll sort of get through it together. And as you sort of said, it's that values fit is more important than that culture fit, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, mate, tell me anyone that is looking for a partnership, anyone that's looking to partner with an agency or an organisation like Rosewood Partners, where's your specialisation? You know, why should they reach out to you? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so, I mean, probably the biggest area of crossover between Julian's and my skill sets is sort of software and digital. So anywhere in that space, we both work a lot. My individual specialization would be the engineering and software side of things. So I've done a lot of stuff in physical products, like building a medical device. So anyone that can build a medical device and working with like robotic startups and other things like that, they're people that I sort of can work very well with. And the other people that we work probably most commonly with is in the e-commerce space. And within those roles, it's always people that are aligned to a project or a product. So product management, project management, business analysts, engineers, software people. They're all people that are working on something, and less so the functions that make a business happen. So less so the finance and the HR and a whole lot of the other core operational functions. But anything in that is where we're probably most passionate about and most able to add value. And it's, I mean, outside of that, it's about finding businesses with people in it that you sort of get behind the cause. You guys are a good example of a business that we would love to work with at Movember. And, I work with a lot of medical device companies because I know that the people that are doing this are building technology to save lives, enhance lives, make people feel better in general. So anywhere in that space, I'd love to help people.
And I love that about you and Julian. I mean, it was the reason why I invited you to Mo HQ, right? Because you didn't reach out to say, hey, we want your business. You reached out to tell me why you're so connected with Movember and why you want to work with Movember, and shared personal stories and things like that made me go, hey, these are good guys. I got to catch up with these guys. So I think, it's a testament. I think the theme of today's podcast has been values. Right.
Yeah.
Throughout your journey, when we're talking about internal recruitment, when we're talking about agency recruitment, and also your business and the organisations that you partner with, today's the values episode, and I've really, really enjoyed this conversation with you, John. And thanks so much for joining the Rubberband podcast. This has been absolutely fabulous and great to catch up with you.
Thanks. And look, anytime you need to fill an episode because you don't have enough guests coming in, just let me know. I'm always happy to jump on and have a chinwag.
I know you can be a regular and relaunch yours and get me on. Here we go.
That's true. I'll do that. A one-off special.
Good on you, mate. So great to see you. Thanks, John.